You're listening to TMI for the week of October 8th, 2018.
You asked, did I get something in the mail?
Yeah. Did you get the Cannabis Act? Here's what you need to know.
No. Well, I haven't checked my mail because I'm high.
Oh.
Too high, man.
Too high, man.
Mm.
Well, this is a nice little card on nice stock. I think I might use it for rolling papers, or for filters. But it's nice stock, and yeah, it's just basically en français on one side and English on the other. And the Cannabis Act is designed to better protect the health and safety of Canadians, to keep cannabis out of the hands of youth, and to keep profits out of the hands of criminals and organized crime. And then they list 2, 4, 6, 8 different things that we need to know. And then it says, if you want to know more, go to www.canada.ca/cannabis or call 1-800-O-Canada. Yeah, interesting.
No, I didn't see that in the mail, but I haven't checked.
Yeah. It's historic, man.
Yeah.
It's October 17th, man.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Legal Cannabis has an excise stamp appearing in different colors for each province and territory on product labels.
Wow.
So you might be tripping out when you've run out of your weed and you're going to the store to pick it up. So just be prepared for the different colors on the excise stamp. So I don't know.
Stamp it right on the weed.
Maybe on the edibles. I'm not too sure. But know about the health effects. It also tells us. What else is there? Well, here, this is a no-brainer, but I guess
no pun
it is
intended.
illegal to take it across the Canadian border. They do point out. And that laws will apply over the other countries. So you don't want to get executed when you go to Indonesia. Don't take it to Indonesia.
Yeah. And there's probably a section about operating machinery and all that stuff.
Yes, there is at the bottom of the first line, or the first column. It says, don't drive high or work impaired, Dave.
Or what? Or run bobcats in reverse up steep hills near expensive stucco.
That's not good.
All that stuff. Not to be too specific.
Or swing from rafters in warehouses.
Mm. Yeah, there's forklifts. Anyway, so I was expecting...
Well, I didn't use a forklift. I
wasn't talking about you. I don't realize... I don't understand why you thought I was talking about you this whole time. But,
well, no, I was just recalling of times working with you and being up in rafters.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay. So
edit it out.
What I expect is that there'd be a photo of the CN Tower falling over and a big pot leaf, October 17th, as a big poster.
Is this what?
Well, they did that when they were fighting against the minimum wage increase. They showed the CN Tower on fire, snapped in half, and Ontario burning in the background. So I thought, somebody would have this idea. But other jurisdictions have transitioned to decriminalization without.
Well, it's interesting because I don't know if I heard this correctly last night, but on CTV, the local CTV affiliate here in Ottawa, they always have a question and of the broadcast, and apparently 62% of people surveyed here in Ottawa don't want to have marijuana sold in stores in the city of Ottawa. So, if you believe that shit.
And it's just that beer is okay, and they didn't mind jailing 60 million people for the last 80 years, but whatever.
Drinking vodka. Anyway.
Which is, just shows how barbaric we are, really, in a lot of ways, but whatever. Okay.
Puritan. I think it's it's the old thing from a long time ago. I mean, it's like, how does the government or an authority repress us, whether it be the church, religion, or the state, and with the Protestant kind of work ethic, well, you only have one day off. You're supposed to work 6 days a week. Work's good for you. Taking time off is bad for you. Whereas in, say, the Catholic faith, you can have your penance. You can what's the word I'm looking for? You can go to confession and your sins can be absolved. But for Protestants, you don't have that, right? You're supposed to suffer. So it's the same thing with all this temperance, and prohibition. In Canada and the States back in the day, 100 years ago almost, right? And so we're still living kind of under prohibition. I mean, only the government can sell, or some government-authorized monopoly like Brewers Retail, or LCBO or whatever whatever it is over in Quebec, can sell hard liquor, right? I mean, that's a form of control, right? And it's the same thing with pot. In Quebec, it can only be sold by the government. So it's kind of weird how that happens. I don't know, man. Maybe I'm just barking up the wrong tree, but I mean,
got to call it what it is. It's statutory morality. It does help shape the culture a little bit. You can have too much things available too easily that helps send a sort of message of approval or disapproval.
Yeah, but you don't see Holland falling apart or France falling apart. I mean, in France and Holland, if I remember correctly, when I was there, you could go to a park and have a glass of wine and have a light lunch, with your friends, Or you could sit with your friends and have a beer, on the pier, next to the Seine or something like that, or next to the canals in Amsterdam. It's not like the countries are falling apart; they're doing quite well. So I don't know. I've never understood Canada, and the United States with this prohibition type attitude. It's just like, oh, come on, really. So it's ridiculous, really. I mean, it's the state saying that it can't trust its citizens to be responsible. That's what it's saying.
Well, it's tough. We do have the murders and the rapes and the this and the that.
You'd still have it with
Yeah, well, I'm just picking apart your idea, this idea of, can the state just stand back and let people self-regulate?
Oh, well, no, I mean, the 7 deadly sins, thou shalt not commit murder or rape is, I think the state needs to be firmly in control of that for sure. But I mean, when it comes to, things like a nice...
Well, let me give you an example. So vitamin C you can buy pretty much anywhere. The state has no statement to make about it. There's been, I guess, well, I don't know how to say this, but I'm thinking back to my childhood when I would see winos and stuff on Parliament Street, and they'd be like, what is it, 2 sheets or 3 sheets to the wind? And, should the government be saying more, buy more? Wine is good for you, but shop at, 24 hours a day, buy a bottle of cheap wine. So it's tough. This is a particularly tough one. There's other examples of statutory morality that we would agree strongly with and disagree strongly with. So it was one of these truly political questions.
Oh, yeah, for sure. No, I mean...
Bill Maher.
What did you say?
So where does beer go to get its reputation back?
Where does beer go to get its reputation fixed? Is that what you said?
No, I said, where does beer go to get its reputation back?
Oh, okay. Well,
this is a connection to Kavanaugh. You did you get it?
Yeah.
Beer, because this is beer, like beer. I don't even know if we had the sound clip last week of beer, but maybe we didn't. Beer.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. No, it's. I think the good.
Okay, should I try it again? I'll try it again. On Bill Maher this week, second line in the beginning of his cold opening. So where does beer go to get its reputation back?
Yeah, seriously, man.
So that whole reaction's fake. Oh my God.
Yeah, well, how do you like that?
No. That's not. I thought I was rereading it because. All right. We might as well get the Kavanaugh thing over with.
That was fake sincerity right there. Exactly. You just have a misunderstanding of when it's applied and when it's not applied. Anyways, yeah, let's get this.
We got it. I can't. I'm done. I'm sick of the Kavanaugh. But, it's going to happen in, about an hour. They're going to vote yes. And they've kind of manufactured their own consent to say yes with their fake FBI report and with these speeches by Susan Collins. Right? Okay, because that was a thing that happened on Friday, right?
Right, yeah. She gave that long, drawn-out speech.
Right. And then after... what's his name? Munchkin?
Munchkin, I think it was something. Munchkins from Whoville?
Mansion? What's his name?
Misogynist?
So you don't know the name
Senator
of
Misogynist?
The other, because there were 4 senators who
Senator Misogynist from Las Vegas.
4 senators were undecided. McMansion? She came out. There were 4 who were undecided.
Senator McLovin.
There were 4. No, that's the judge. There were 4 who were undecided. Manchin, I believe, he's actually the only Democrat who's voting with the Republicans.
He's going to be in the unemployment line at Christmas.
Apparently, his state is so red it's suspected that's why he's voting with the Republicans.
Oh, I feel my chest I feel like I'm having a heart attack. That's too funny.
Putting his seat ahead of right and wrong is a form of corruption. Am I wrong here?
Well, I mean...
If you were to define corruption, a corrupt government, a corrupt system, a corrupt legislature, a corrupt party, a corrupt judge, does he not become corrupt if he puts like Democrat or Republican ahead of the law or right and wrong? Is that not corrupt?
Well, yeah.
And yet, that's the primary criticism of Kavanaugh by some 2,400 law professors now, and growing, who believe that his partisanship corrupted his impartiality as a Supreme Court justice. But let me say this to you. If we were talking about the Supreme Court 6 months ago, you would start listing all the Republican justices and all the Democratic justices, the ones you could count on to uphold, on one hand, Roe versus Wade, and on the other hand, Citizens United. So before we even come to Kavanaugh, they're already corrupt by partisan affiliation.
Well, I thought it was revealing when the Jesuits, I think it was on Tuesday, decided to no longer support him. And I think at some point, didn't he have a Jesuit education?
St. George is a Jesuit prep school.
Oh, okay, my bad. So, yeah, they even dropped him like a hot potato. So they just said he didn't...
but meanwhile, in the speech, by both, I believe, Manchin and Collins, they cited the rating, and others have cited his rating amongst the professional association as him having an AB rating in lawyership, which apparently is the best you can have.
Okay.
So it's kind of like the Nobel organization giving
a peace prize or something like that. Or physics prize.
For drone cameras.
Yeah, well, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I mean, I think this just puts November under an even finer microscope, and it'll be interesting to see if anybody really, from the Democratic side actually does go out and vote.
So in weighing the pros and cons or the costs and benefits of one side of the House, the Senate, voting one way and the other another, they knew they were going to tick off women. The question is, was that calculation correct? The risk. Right? Because if they've pissed off women, they knew they were going to piss off women. But if they pissed them off to the point where, there was a mass movement in the voting pattern, that was a failed calculation. But some are suggesting that there could be 75 seats change hands after these midterms, like a landslide of a shift to the Democratic.
And I heard this morning that the unemployment rate in the United States, according, if you believe the latest figures, is now down to 4%, which means it's virtually no unemployment in the States.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if that's the case, but as we saw in Quebec just recently this week, you can have a 4% unemployment rate in a growing economy, and they're going to still kick you out. So when it comes to politics, it's like, what are people feeling in their gut? What are people feeling in their hearts and minds,
What you're sort of suggesting is that in exchange for them attacking every corner of responsible government, people are experiencing a pleasant economy. And so it's like, at what price? But it's just like how we used to think of totalitarian states that selected you from a certain age to work your life in a particular career. So they're guaranteeing 100% employment, but at what price? So, I don't know.
Excellent point.
It all comes down to... Okay, so we do have some clips.
Well, let's do the clips. Clip trip.
So we have Kavanaugh in 2015 making a speech to a law school audience.
Okay. Really important, I think, to walk in the other's shoes, whether it be the other litigants, the litigants in the case, the other judges, to understand them, to keep our emotions in check, to be calm amidst the storm. On the bench, to put it in the vernacular, don't be a jerk. I think that's important, to be a good umpire and a good judge. Don't be a jerk.
It's a Democratic conspiracy. It's the Clintons. I don't know. That's all I see. I see a very... It's like he was passing a boulder between his... So, yeah, that's... Oh, my. Okay.
Kavanaugh, the same speech. And this is the famous speech where he says, what stays at St. George's stays. So it's the same speech. Okay. Kavanaugh, 2015... judges as umpires.
Oh, okay.
Run through what I think a judge as umpire means. First, and probably most obviously, not being a political partisan. You have to check those political allegiances at the door when you become a judge. You have to shed them. It's very important at the outset for a judge who wants to be an umpire to avoid any semblance of that partisanship, of that political background, of that background they might have had in a particular line of work. That's the first, probably most fundamental thing for a judge who wants to be an umpire.
Yeah, or working for the Bush White House.
Yeah, it's a Democratic conspiracy. I keep on hearing that. It's a Democratic conspiracy.
The behavior of several of the Democratic members of this committee at my hearing a few weeks ago was an embarrassment. But at least it was just a good old-fashioned attempt at borking. Those efforts didn't work. When I did at least okay enough at the hearings that it looked like I might actually get confirmed, a new tactic was needed. Some of you were lying in wait and had it ready. You've tried hard. You've given it your all. No one can question your effort. But your coordinated and well-funded effort to destroy my good name and destroy my family will not drive me out. What goes around comes around. This has destroyed my family and my good name. A good name built up through decades of very hard work and public service at the highest levels of the American government. This whole 2-week effort has been a calculated and orchestrated political hit, fueled with apparent pent-up anger about President Trump and the 2016 election, fear that has been unfairly stoked about my judicial record, revenge on behalf of the Clintons.
Is he like hoisting himself and nailing himself to the cross, or like what the hell?
He's, in my opinion, having an emotional breakdown. And you'd have to watch the video. What is it? There should be a name for this. When men cry, they scrunch their face in a weird way. And their chin starts to look weird, and the corners of their mouths pull down, and it's a thing. And he's crying through the whole fucking thing. Like, he's a crier.
I haven't seen the video.
Well,
I mean, in that particular, okay, well, the first thing that comes to mind, I'm trying to mimic what you've just described to me. Sometimes, I just had the funeral a few weeks ago for Mark, so, I remember being there trying not to cry, so sometimes, you're kind of biting the inside of your lip, you're kind of...
It's unprofessional.
A few times. No, what do you mean it's not professional? Sometimes you just...
Yeah, it's a job interview. If you're there answering questions about sexual assault and blackout drinking, and people have come forward who are also professors.
Okay, but I'm playing devil's advocate.
Yeah.
Okay, so because you always have to look at every side of every argument.
So let me accept your premise, and others have as well. They've said if you were accused of all this, you would have been emotional,
furious. If I had a family and children,
cry,
and my wife and everything, I'd be furious.
Okay. All right. So that adds credibility to his argument. So let's just move on. Okay. Former Supreme Court Justice John Paul Stevens, 98 years old.
Oh, I heard about this guy.
The qualifications for to sit on the Supreme Court, the hearings caused me to change my mind. He has demonstrated a potential bias, and that the senator should really pay attention to it.
Yeah, I was really surprised when I heard about this former justice. Really, somebody should have read Kavanaugh's speech before he presented, if the Republicans were for him.
I could be wrong, but I think that was made public a day before.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh. Okay. Flake, the last time he made sense.
I was very troubled by the tone of the remarks. The initial defense that Judge Kavanaugh gave was something like I told my wife, I hope that I would sound that indignant if I felt that I was unjustly, maligned. But then it went on, and the interaction with the members was sharp and partisan, and that concerns me. And I tell myself, you give a little leeway because of what he's been through. But on the other hand, we can't have this on the court. We simply can't.
That's self-explanatory. I'm surprised he wasn't coached. With somebody who is applying for such a coveted position, where the hell were his handlers, and why weren't people going over his speech or his testimony?
It was reported that all that week he was invited back to the White House for coaching. And he was there, I think, 3 of 5 weekdays.
Okay.
Leading up to those hearings, so he was coached. Speculation was that Donald Trump, who dislikes people who don't appear powerful and domineering on television, are
that's bloody
pussies.
Abusive, though. That was just bloody abusive.
Well, if you compare it to all his other testimony and his presence on Fox News days before,
Okay.
his demeanor changed after spending several evenings at the White House.
Well, it's toxic environment, I think, would change anybody, eh?
He's a judge. He's not supposed to be changed. Okay.
I know. But
Just being an ass.
what's interesting, though, is that I riddle me this, Batman. I don't know if there's any truth to this or not. I just only heard it once. I'm not too sure if it was out of the States or not. That, hypothetically speaking, Democrats take over both houses in November, or however that works, that they theoretically, once Kavanaugh is approved later on this afternoon, that it's only been done twice before or 3 times before, that they can impeach the Supreme Court justice and somehow remove him from office that way.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's always that. If the FBI probe, once again, hypothetically speaking, the Democrats take control, they could initiate on their own.
And what Trump will do is, over the next 2 years, convince Americans that if they act on any of these checks and balances, they can kiss their jobs goodbye. So here's...
yeah, but you know the state. You know the bureaucracy controls the state. It's not these old men, white men. I mean, it's the bureaucracy, really, at the end of the day, controls what goes on.
We sure have seen him shape and recolor the American landscape. Right, what happened to the EPA is now saying that small amounts of radiation are good for us. So the EPA now has been infiltrated by a pro-nuclear toxicologist.
I mean, the shares I got to tell you, I mean, shares in General Electric have been sliding from their power division, have been bringing the company down overall. So
Westinghouse bankrupted and almost brought down Toshiba with it.
Yeah, it's not looking good right now. So unless they divest from that part of their business empire and go more to clean energy or tidal energy or something like that.
I'll follow up on this, but one of the news stories this week wasn't there arrests or something earlier this week, and it had to do with hacking.
Oh shit! Yeah.
And I'm always very interested in how the news covers this. So they mentioned Westinghouse. They mentioned that it was a fuel supplier to certain Russian reactor sites.
Oh, okay.
But they didn't say reactor, and they didn't say nuclear. They just said fuel supplier for Russian power plants or something like that. But this is what I've been saying all along. A lot of this Manafort deal making and stuff is all about projects, but you don't chase after small projects. You chase after the tens of $billion projects. If you're going to make 0.001% off the top, it better be off of a $24 billion project, right? And
so you're saying that Trudeau's going to get something out of this $40 billion LNG project out in Kitimat?
Is that to sell it to the Japanese? I'm not up on that. No, I'm saying that people who are these middlemen who make their money guiding and lobbying political decisions in favor of corporations. If you're one of these people like Manafort pushing these Russian deals all on the down low while you're running a campaign or whatever, to restore your personal finances, it's no surprise that the projects that are involved are high-cost projects like nuclear projects.
Okay, I follow your logic. Okay, gotcha.
But anyway, I'm going to look deeper into that story later. Let's get back to this.
Apparently that just when you look deeper into it, what you'll find interesting about the LNG project out west that was just announced this week, it's the biggest project of its kind on the planet.
And there's probably liberal middlemen who are making 0.001%. Right.
And also First Nations. Apparently the First Nations are going to get hundreds of millions of dollars from this project up there. So, yeah,
I don't know much about the processing and distribution and impacts
of natural gas,
liquefied petroleum.
Yeah.
You're talking about liquefied natural gas.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Accuser. Michael Avenatti's client, Swetnick, is one of the three major accusers. I have a little clip of her.
I saw him giving red Solo cups to quite a few girls during that time frame, and there was green punch at those parties. And I would not take one of those glasses from Bart Kavanaugh, excuse me. I saw him around the punch, I won't say bowls, or the punch containers. I don't know what he did, but I saw him buy them, yes.
Bart Kavanaugh. Where he testified that he was, or at least misled Congress. He was asked directly, "Are you Bart Kavanaugh?" Okay.
No, I'm just remembering. I'm just recalling my days, or at least the ones that I can remember, anyways. The parties that were like that.
I think it was only at one. I think I was only at one party ever that had a keg.
Oh no way.
And that was in Patrick's place at John. There was a party there. There was a keg and a few garbage cans full of ice. With
yeah,
beers.
we had a few parties. We had the
was
one
only
big
one.
one. Yeah, I have pictures of that party still.
That was the last. He was about to move out of there.
Yeah.
Anyway, we can't use any of this.
No,
okay.
No, definitely not.
So, let me finish.
And that wasn't high school. That was with a bunch of people.
That was later.
All adults.
Yeah. Okay. The punch bowl. So here's Kavanaugh under questioning last week before the Justice Committee.
You're saying there's never been a case where you drank so much that you didn't remember what happened the night before or part of what happened?
You're asking about, blackout. I don't know. Have you?
Could you answer the question, Judge? That's not happened. Is that your answer?
Yeah, and I'm curious if you have.
I have no drinking problem, Judge.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, that was a weird back and forth. I mean.
Okay. One of his former drinking buddies, Professor Chad Ludington.
Right from Central Casting.
Chad. Okay. We have two clips from him.
I do not believe that heavy drinking or even loudish behavior of an 18 or even 21-year-old should condemn a person for the rest of his life. I would be a hypocrite to think so.
Having said that...
that in denying the possibility that he ever blacked out from drinking and in downplaying the degree and frequency of his drinking, Brett has not told the truth. I felt it was my civic duty to tell of my experience while drinking with Brett, and I offer this statement to the press. I have no desire to speak further publicly and nothing more to say to the press at this time. I will, however, take my information to the FBI, and on that note, I contacted the FBI, contacted me this morning, I contacted them, I've received the form, I filled it out with the details, but I can't give those to anybody right now. Thank you very much.
Your former roommate said he never saw him black out, and he was with him when he got home at night and saw him when he woke up. Your response to that?
I unfortunately believe that my probably now ex-friend is lying.
Wow.
Well, I don't resemble that statement, and I'm not running for office, so I don't have to worry about my past coming back to haunt me. Dear.
64 people have contacted the FBI while they were doing their fake investigation, and none of them were contacted back. People just full of stories left, right, and center.
And then you can take probably half of those stories away for not being credible, and you still got 30 stories that you'd have to investigate, right? So,
Ford under questioning.
But the details about that night that bring me here today are the ones I will never forget. They have been seared into my memory and have haunted me episodically as an adult.
You are very clear about the attack, being pushed into the room. You say you don't know quite by whom, but that it was Brett Kavanaugh that covered your mouth to prevent you from screaming, and then you escaped. How are you so sure that it was he?
The same way that I'm sure that I'm talking to you right now. It's just basic memory functions, and also just the level of norepinephrine and epinephrine in the brain that sort of, as you know, encodes, that neurotransmitter encodes memories into the hippocampus, and so the trauma-related experience then is kind of locked there, whereas other details kind of drift.
So what you are telling us is this could not be a case of mistaken identity?
Absolutely not.
You would not mix up somebody else with Bart Kavanaugh, is that correct?
Correct.
Or Mark Judge?
Correct.
Well, then let's go back to the incident. What is the strongest memory you have? Strongest memory of the incident, something that you cannot forget. Take whatever time you need.
Indelible in the hippocampus is the laughter, the uproarious laughter between the two, and they're having fun at my expense.
You've never forgotten that laughter. You've never forgotten them laughing at you.
They were laughing with each other.
And you were the object of the laughter?
I was, underneath one of them while the two laughed. Two friends having a really good time with one another.
And Dr. Ford, I'll just conclude with this. You do remember what happened, do you not?
Very much so.
Thank you.
Dr. Ford, with what degree of certainty do you believe Bart Kavanaugh assaulted you?
100%.
100%.
Thursday, in front of one of his Trump rallies, Trump started attacking, maybe it was Wednesday.
Oh, yeah.
Started attacking
Dr. Ford.
And I just thought this was an interesting example of why I love Lawrence O'Donnell.
Only one beer that night. And so Donald Trump kept repeating that line, I had one beer. I had one beer. And in a rant against Dr. Ford. And so if you take your children to a Trump rally now, you're going to have to explain to them what gang rape is, if they don't already know, because Donald Trump also boomed the words gang rape repeatedly. The only president in history to use the words gang rape in a political speech, the only president in history to use the words gang rape to try to score political points. And we have that video of what Donald Trump said in Mississippi, and it is pure presidential pornography. It is vile. It is poison. A deeply perverted, self-confessed sexual assaulter mocking the very concept of sexual assault to a cheering crowd that includes children in Mississippi. Some of you might want to see it. You might want to see him saying those words. You can find it online. I don't want to see it again. I've seen it once. I don't ever want to see it again. And I have an editorial function here, and I have decided to not show you the horrible words of that deeply disgraceful man and the people who cheered that man, who they have all heard describe his own favorite methods of sexual assault. And so I will not be staining this program tonight with the poison spewed by the President of the United States.
Well, golf claps.
So, I've said this before, and I'll say it again. If the Democrats are that rudderless, they only have themselves to blame if they can't get people out to vote. So, they'll have to look at themselves in the mirror the night after.
Last week on Saturday Night Live, Michael Che said,
these hearings have taught me a lot about what happens at white prep schools, and I never thought I'd say this, but I'm sending my kids to a black school where it's safe.
There you go.
So that brings us around to this 30-page article in the New York Times talking about the history of Donald Trump's wealth.
Yeah, that particular issue of the New York Times was sold out by the time I got it, or was trying to get it, so I'm going to rely on you for this one. It was actually 30 pages.
Well, that's what I heard.
You know, I started off in Brooklyn. My father gave me a small loan of $1 million. I came into Manhattan, and I had to pay him back, and I had to pay him back with interest. My father gave me a very small loan in 1975, and I built it into a company that's worth many, many billions of dollars with some of the greatest assets in the world. And I say that only because that's the kind of thinking that our country needs.
Wow. So you repeat the narrative enough times to try to sound convincing and real, eh? I mean, that's just incredible.
And the equivalent, he was given an equivalent of $413 million by his dad. And his dad essentially took $1 billion, distributed it amongst his Donald Trump's siblings, did it in such a way that they evaded inheritance tax, and they saved $550 million out of $1 billion.
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to sound like a real gross capitalist, white, middle-aged, privileged male, even though I'm not anymore. But if the loopholes are there, and you have a good tax attorney who can exploit those loopholes, while it's morally repugnant, hey man, if I can save myself $500 million in taxes and it's legal.
A portion of that was by undervaluing his real estate portfolio. So that's fraud.
Prove it.
Well, that's fraud,
Prove
and there's
it.
all the documents exist.
Well, I mean, if you can prove it,
The
then,
proof
yeah, well.
is the 40-page article, and they've listed the properties, shown what the Trumps had them evaluated at, and then what they turned around a couple years later and sold them for. So it's all there, and that's fraud. But whatever.
No, I mean, I'm not going to commit fraud.
There is a belief that the government's job is to try to extract as much tax revenue from you, and that it's your duty to try to pay as little as you can.
Well, so they have H&R Block and KPMG and places like that, exactly.
Right, within the law. So fraud, yeah. Okay.
Find us on Twitter at @ThatArcher, our podcast page, tmi.twxnet.com. Rate the show on iTunes. It changes the way the show is listed.
Watching HR Puffin stuff when I was like 4 years old, and the banana splits, and I think that had a profound impact on me.
Right. Well, those guys were interviewed on Gilbert Gottfried in a previous episode, a few episodes ago.
Get that? Really?
Oh yeah.
HR Puffin stuff,
the two comedians who wrote it when they were like 22 or whatever, back in 1960.
7, 8,
or something.
9 or something like that. I remember watching that.
But those are sort of prolific artists. They have a whole style. We really want to know their names.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, they were very... Sorry?
Hey, Leary. What is the names of the two comedians who created HR Puffin stuff?
Yeah, man. That's a difficult one. I'm going to go out on a limb and say maybe Cheech and Chong.
Okay, hang on. Okay, it's Sid and Marty Krofft.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I remember that stuff, yeah.
But not only are they have a whole artistic style. It's a whole thing, man. It's not just HR Puffin stuff. And their incredibly long career. The episode of Gilbert Gottfried, you can just look, and Gilbert Gottfried's Amazing Colossal Podcast for the Marty Krofft episode. And
Marty Krofft, okay.
It's more than you want to know about HR Puffin stuff. But, I mean, that's was slightly before my time, but in rerun on Sunday afternoons or whatever, and you'd catch little snippets of them.
Mm-hmm.
I was young enough when I first saw it that it affected some of my childhood dreams. The talking trees and the flute was a little weird, and you know.
Oh, for sure. No, I remember watching it, and I was absolutely mesmerized.
Right.
Between them and the Fruit Loops guys or whatever they were, like, again, I can't remember. It was like, I remember HR Puffin stuff and another
But
one.
so here's what I'm going to do is suggest that, isn't there a connection between that whole McDonald land and the Mayor McCheese?
The Mayor McCheese.
And I think the hamburger really reminded me of HR Puffin stuff.
Yeah. Well, the whole Wizard of Oz kind of vibe too. That's I was wondering, and this has popped into my brain right now. It's like, were they somehow influenced by that as well? Because wasn't there like a Witchy Poo or something like that? No, hold on a second.
Yeah,
where was Witchy Poo?
Well,
hold on, Witchy Poo.
Yeah.
Was that HR Puffin stuff? And Peter and
Hey
and
Leary.
that flute?
Hey Leary.
Yeah, man. What's up?
Ian has a question for you.
Yeah, Leary. Was there not a Witchy Poo or some magic flute and some dude, some young guy or whatever, and Witchy Poo was trying to get after an HR Puffin stuff? Yeah, man. So totally. Yeah, there was, but, you have to go to my cousin Google, because, I got short-term memory problems. Not enough RAM, man. There you go.
Not enough RAM.
Not enough RAM. There. I left the 5-second pause.
A flute named Freddie.
Okay.
Okay, here's another thing. There used to be on CTV morning TV for kids.
Okay.
The Wonderful World of the Wizard of Oz.
Oh, yeah.
It's a funny place where everyone wears a funny, funny face, and the streets are paved with gold, and no one ever grows old.
In that funny land called the
Wizard of Oz. So.
Yeah.
That was surreal.
Very Alice in Wonderland, man.
Yeah,
Very
somewhere in my CD pile, somebody did assemble a couple episodes, and I have it on DVD. I just.
Oh, no way. Okay.
But that was a freak show. Some of these things affected my dreams.
I believe it. Yep. Same here. Totally. I think for the good as well. I mean, it totally expanded, I think, our horizons, our minds, and, without having to resort to using mind-altering substances, as children, it lent itself to teaching us how to have a fertile imagination, or just using our imagination.
Holy. So this goes on in great detail about all the characters, and there's the good trees, and then there were the evil trees, the mushrooms, the crustaceans. Oh, Witchy Poo's castle. So this is definitely it. Witchy Poo and her minions. So this is definitely H.R. Puffin stuff.
It was H.R. Puffin. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not having
the winds. I kind of remember something about the winds. The winds of Living Island.
Oh.
The wind.
Yeah.
Was a character.
The wind was a character. Okay, I'm gonna be tripping on that one all night. The wind. I'm trying to remember that one.
Max von Totenauf. The Boyds, hippie ants. A group of ants that would try to have candy. Free candy from Pop Lolly. I mean, it was just hippie ants. TikTok.
So the banana splits were totally different from H.R. Puffin stuff, though, right?
No, this is all H.R. Puffin stuff.
So banana splits was also H.R. Puffin stuff?
No,
or was
I never said banana splits.
Oh, okay, sorry.
The Boyds, Shirley Puffin stuff, Max von Toten stuff, Good Trees. Yeah, you've lost me. Anyway.
That's wild. Okay. Down the rabbit hole there with you.
HR puff and stuff. Totally connected with the Kavanaugh.
Oh, well, yeah, I know. Go down the rabbit holes, kids. You'll never come out. Okay, moving on from Kavanaugh of this guy. Moving on with our headlines. So, post-tornado week 2 or week 3 now. So on Monday, a preliminary report came out that not only is the Ottawa-Gatineau region woefully unprepared for another 6 tornadoes or liquefaction as a result of an Indonesian or Japanese-style earthquake, but that as soon as the power went out here in Ottawa at 6 p.m. on Friday the 21st of September, the cell towers, and I noticed this when I was over at a friend's place, started failing about 4 to 6 hours afterwards, depending on who your carrier was, whether it was Rogers or Bell or whatever. And because they only had backup generators, and they weren't adequate enough, and so it was really hard for the city to communicate with the citizens as to what was going on, where to get emergency food or water, or to charge.
Because they made a big deal about the emergency management notifications and.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So this called into question everything across Canada, from Vancouver, with the earthquakes and what have you, and avalanches in the central interior BC to tsunami-prone places along the coast. So
I love how there has to be a disaster for anyone to think of these things. Like you couldn't have anticipated the cell towers would go down.
Yeah, but I mean, isn't half
this is the nuclear thing, right? We're always presumed that we're all, and they assure us, we've got the finest, this and that, state-of-the-art Canadian blah, 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 right? And that, a fucking storm blows through, and all that notification, emergency management stuff is just...
half of everything that we discover as humans, as a species, is out of accidents, right? So how to build
not
a proper
foreseeable
boat. Well, how are you supposed to foresee when you're building
a power
ship?
outage?
Well, I'm just saying, if you whittle it down to the
no,
no. Well, I mean, look, the power grid, we know that the power grid is susceptible to electromagnetic pulses, whether they be from a solar flare or from an EMP attack from
or a strong wind
to happen. No,
or
I'm talking
a
about
power
an EMP.
outage.
I'm talking about an
EMP.
EMP.
I heard you.
And we haven't. Our water filtration plants are not adequately prepared for that. Yeah. Nor are our hydroelectric facilities adequately.
We're never prepared for this stuff, and we think we're on top of it. And it applies to everything, whether it's Lac-Mégantic type rail disaster, which there's been histories of here on the Pacific Line near Mississauga in 1989, or it's always unforeseen. I just find that annoying.
Oh no, I agree. I agree, but I think this is part of the human frailty. Why do we keep on going back to the same thing over and over and over again, whether it's this government or another government, or whether it's here in Canada, the States, or in Russia, or whatever? It's human nature.
You elect a moron, and then we're like, we never knew that there'd be consequences. That's just okay.
Or you just feed people a line, and they believe it. You present it to them in a convincing way.
All right, I'll see your news headline with at an auction in London, Sotheby's,
Banksy,
a Banksy painting. As soon as the gavel fell and sold it for $1.4 million, it spit it out the bottom, shredded. And they have a photo of all the onlookers with their mouths open.
Buyer beware.
So Sotheby's essentially said they had been Banksy'd. The work Girl with a Balloon, a 2006 spray paint on canvas, was in the lot at Sotheby's.
Damn.
Banksy.
So it was the girl with the balloon that ended up getting shredded.
There's a little bit of suspiciousness, like it just happened to be the last thing for sale. Everybody just happened to take the picture at the right time. Sotheby's is making it sound like, my reading of the article made it sound like, oh, well, once that gavel falls, it's sold. It's not our problem. And who gets the money? And I think Banksy was there. There's some people were whisked out of the room. And know. So it's, if I owned Sotheby's, I'd be complicit with a stunt like that. But no money would change hands at the end, and it'd be an act of art. And if you're Sotheby's, you stand by selling pop art, and that just ups the whole brand and excitement of the entire process. You never know what's going to happen at a Sotheby's auction. I mean, but then that's me. That's why I'm not running.
But then I would take the hard-nosed Austrian drum approach, Swiss approach. As soon as the gavel's down, it's yours. Sorry, didn't have anything to do with it.
Yeah, well.
The painting is yours, sir.
Okay. How do you hang Sotheby's? Apparently, the paintings, when they're sold that way, are normally leaning against something. This is the rare example where the painting was hanging on the wall. Secondly, it's handled by Sotheby's in every way, in the chain of custody. You didn't notice there's a shredder on the back of the painting?
Okay, that was my question. That was going to be my follow-up question. I had heard, I heard this as I was waking up this morning, so I wasn't too sure if I was dreaming this or not. Was the shredder built into the frame, or was the shredder on the back of the piece of art? Like, where was it? Like, in relation to the...
Hidden. That's hidden. But...
where?
I'm just suspicious of one of the most prestigious auction houses, probably running a couple 100 years.
Oh, for sure.
Didn't notice a shredder part of the art that they were selling, and would have had, if I'm not mistaken, investigated for authenticity and examined in great detail and all that stuff. Okay.
Well, something's rotten in Denmark then, man, I tell you.
All right.
Okay, so I'm going to up that one. Let's see. Okay, I see your Banksy, and I raise you Honda to invest in GM self-driving car unit, GM Cruise. Automaker will commit $750 million initially, and then another $2 billion over the next 12 years. What they want to do, and they did this in conjunction with Japan's SoftBank Group, which invested $2.2 billion in June. And so I guess they own about 19.6% now in Cruise. So it's $14.6 billion, and they want to have self-driving, fully autonomous cars for the masses by 2021. And that's in line with Fiat Chrysler and BMW. They, about a year ago, had this whole thing signed up, and by 2021, they want to have producing fully automated vehicles. And BMW has just also signed an agreement with Intel and an Israeli car camera software company, Mobileye. So they're really, everybody's running a full tilt to the finish line on this. And Toyota in August signed $500 million with Uber, and they're going to work on a whole thing for right around the world for fully autonomous self-driving vehicles in the Sienna minivans, so for their ride-hailing network. So, I mean, it's just absolutely incredible. And just to top this off, in an undisclosed city somewhere in North America, GM, along with SoftBank, will be, sometime in 2019, having robot taxi service. From this Thursday, it says here, according to the New York Times, that the relationship is gone, quote unquote, after U.S.-Canada NAFTA talks. That's the headline. And then it just goes through chronologically how things went from good to bad to sideways. And So if you listen to the way Frank McKenna, former Canadian ambassador to the United States, tells it, and he also was the premier from New Brunswick, well, why don't we just let the article tell us what he says? If he thinks that everything's all patched up, then he is terribly wrong, referring to the United States. The president has insulted our country, our prime minister, and even our chief negotiator, said Frank McKenna, former premier of New Brunswick and former Canadian ambassador to the United States. He's not only used rude language, he's threatened our economic welfare, Mr. McKenna said. And he's seen to do it with great glee. People won't forget that. I think that's now deep in our psyche. When Trudeau was pressed, he was very diplomatic. He said more by saying very little. And this is what he said. The relationship between the U.S. and Canadians is much deeper than just the relationship between two individuals.
A low point occurred, was it under Trudeau and...
No, it was under Pearson and Pearson.
Oh, it's Ronald Reagan and Trudeau. Wasn't there some animosity?
Yeah, but Pearson and Johnson actually physically assaulted Pearson. So.
Was cliffhanger? What? No more information? You drop a bomb like that and that's it? Crickets?
No, apparently what happened was Pearson was Canada's prime minister. He was also a Nobel Prize laureate. And he called for the suspension of bombing in Vietnam by the United States. And it was in a speech that he gave in Philadelphia. He visited President Lyndon Johnson at Camp David the next day. And apparently the President of the United States was so enraged with the head of state actually saying, hey, stop the violence, that he got a little violent himself and lifted up our Prime Minister by the lapels and yelled at him, you've pissed on my rug. So, nice Texas presidential...
The war was his rug?
But, yeah. I guess so. Yeah. You know, those people from the States, you know, they kill their presidents. They kill anybody who's against the status quo. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Kennedy, both Kennedys, you know, brothers. So, but apparently, Pew, a research company, did a poll just recently, and they found that only 39% of Canadians now have a favorable view of the United States, and it's the lowest that they've had since they began polling Canadians in 2002. This NAFTA 2.0, you know, agreement keeps high dairy tariffs. U.S. farmers will be able to export more products before levies kick in. Washington. It was the only specific Canadian trade policy U.S. President Donald Trump talked about, and he talked about it over and over. Quote, you know, they have tariffs of almost 300% on some of our dairy products, and we can't have that. We're not going to stand for that, Trump said in the White House in August. Then again, he said, at a campaign rally in Indiana in August, he said the same thing. And then he said it again at the White House in September. They cannot continue to charge us 300% tariff on dairy products, and that's what they're doing. Well, we had the deal last Sunday. Guess what? Trump made a trade agreement that continues to charge 300% on these, or their dairy coming into here. Sorry, pardon me, I get so excited when I read this article. The new United States-Mexico agreement includes cuts to only 2 of Canada's dairy-related tariffs, and the U.S. agreed to these same cuts, and in return, both sides will phase out tariffs on whey and margarine. Other than that, Canada's tariffs of more than 200% on various other dairy items, milk, cream, cheese, butter, will remain the same as they were. A Canadian government official confirmed on Thursday. So the U.S. farmers will get a bigger quantity of their dairy products into Canada, 3.6%, before prohibitive tariffs kick in. And so the Americans sell it this way. Look, we have more products going in at a lower tariff rate, and the Canadians can say, look, we protected our supply management and kept tariffs high. So it's all in the way you sell it. All that, we're going to destroy their economy. All that, they don't negotiate in good faith. All that, Justin Trudeau is very dishonest and a bad man. All that, there's a special place in hell for them. All that, and the bloody tariffs still remain. Can you tell me what just happened this summer? Like, were we in the land of Oz?
Oh, he's just playing to his base.
I know, but I mean, when you're on the receiving end of the boot kicking you in the head, it's like, I mean, I don't know.
Well, he didn't turn $550 million into $550 million without being one of the greatest minds ever. Depending on what he's worth.
Chirp.
Well, he claimed when he entered into the race for president that he was $1.4 billion. So turning $550 million into $1.4 billion.
I don't think that really is a stretch. You just leave it in a high interest savings account. I'm pretty sure you're going to get a lot of money if you don't touch it for 40 years. I'm pretty sure all those people who didn't get their final paychecks at the Trump casino just before rent day in Atlantic City all support his business.
If you take $500 million or $413 million and you put it in a bank with compounding interest for 40 years, I think that's some pretty serious compounding interest.
Well, and don't forget the interest rates back in the 80s were what? Weren't they pretty high back then?
22%.
Or was that on borrowing, not on savings?
Well, they're directly tied. Okay, I'm just going to see what I can do with it. The amoral capitalist is often found in the Southern District of New York, where he misrepresents the value of his buildings and other assets to avoid inheritance tax. To find out more, contact the FBI or a district office near you. Kavanaugh insists, as far as the sexual assault goes, he was fully consenting.
That's not being used in the show, is it?
I'm kidding.
I was fully consenting. What are you talking about? Jesus Christ. Was that Bill Cosby's show for the first weekend in jail?
I wrote that.
You wrote that one? Oh, I thought that was Bill Cosby's first opening monologue in the new Philadelphia prison that he's in.
Interesting tweet. Facts do matter. Will Donnelly. Okay. 51 senators who represent 40% of the population will confirm a SCOTUS nominee who has the support of under 40% of the population and was dominated by a man who came in second in the popular vote. Can we stop saying the U.S. is the greatest democracy in the world? It was never true. Most powerful man in the world, highest office in the world, last bastion of democracy.
Never advocated that. Nope.
Greatest country in the world.
Never advocated that. Nope.
You know, something that occurs to me is, we tolerated their apple pie in the sky.
Because they were going to take us over. I mean, the last time they tried to invade us was 1898.
Hang on.
So,
American exceptionalism and the manifest destiny and their aircraft carriers and bases all over the world. And we sort of ignored that. How can you have a democracy with two parties that vote in solid blocks and all of that, the corporate money, Citizens United, super PACs, all of that. But if a president came in and started destroying every principle of the culture. At some point, when you've destroyed the Department of Justice, the EPA, institutions like the FBI, the credibility of trust in politics, you've sacrificed the duty of the Congress to hold the president accountable and act as a check and balance, or speak for reason and truth, or reflect the culture, and things like the most Americans want gun control and still no, or health control, or health care, etc. But I just wonder now that you've just tainted the Supreme Court. It's like, I just feel like the rest of the world has tolerated American dominance. It occurs to me that if there's no remaining check and balance, it's up to the rest of the world, like Sweden and Denmark or Canada or whomever, the tiny little countries. If there's no check and balance against American military dominance planetarily, I mean, we could pretend that a properly founded rule of law, or a Supreme Court, or a House, what do they call it, their fucking legislature, the House of Representatives or the Senate, were fulfilling its sworn duty to uphold at least the Constitution, or follow the rule of law, the principle upon which departments were created, like having somebody like Davos had the Ministry of Education, or Department of Education, just purposely there to dismantle all of the sort of pinnacles upon which the American society was founded, its rule of law. I mean, gave some credible moral authority, or at least just a reason to go along with their dominance. It's very possible by now we know something about the nomination.
Yeah, so what does it say?
Okay, 50-48.
Yeah, that's what we thought. Okay.
Kavanaugh is confirmed to the Supreme Court. Comedian Amy Schumer and a few other actresses were arrested Thursday at protests at the Supreme Court.
Amy Schumer was arrested?
Yeah.
Really?
And what about this Interpol president reported missing during a trip to China? So, he was stationed in France. The weird parts are, it took his wife a week to report him missing. Apparently he was last seen in Beijing, or China somewhere.
Oh, okay.
And the suspicion is that he's been taken into custody by Chinese police officials. And we won't really hear much of anything until his punishment is announced, if at all. Maybe he was a spy, or he's been called back from his mission by China, the marriage was a ruse. I mean, it's a James Bond type story, I think.
Find us on Twitter @thatarcher. Send us an email, archer@twxnet.com. For guest links and contact info, visit our podcast page, tmi.twxnet.com. Find us on Android and Apple Podcast apps. Subscribe and rate the show on iTunes.
I'm Dave Archer in Toronto.
And I'm Ian Stolberg in Ottawa.